I am the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the space we are in tonight. I'm really excited that we are all here together. And we have two co-sponsoring organizations with us, and so I'm going to ask them to come up and grab that middle microphone, starting with Ray from JVP.
I can project, yeah. Okay, cool. Hi guys. Like ER said, my name is Ray. I'm here with Jewish Voice for Peace, or JVP. Thank you so much to Charis, ER, Adam, and of course Molly, sorry I'm blocking you, for being here tonight and hosting this event. JVP is the largest progressive Jewish anti-Zionist organization in the world. Yeah, yay. We are organizing a grassroots, multiracial, cross-class, intergenerational movement of U.S. Jews in solidarity with the Palestinian freedom struggle, guided by a vision of justice, equality, and dignity for all peoples. We believe that through organizing, we can dismantle the institutions and structures that sustain injustice and grow something new, joyful, and life-sustaining in its place. Events such as these and our Shabbat potlucks that we do the first of every Friday are part of the JVP community building intended on inspiring and replenishing ourselves for our very difficult work ahead. As many of you know, the work never seems to end. We're also currently partnering with a local organization right now on our Evict Elbit campaign. This aims to kick Israel's largest weapons manufacturing company and their subsidiary office out of Duluth, Georgia. If you're interested, if you guys are interested in learning more about how you can join JVP events or our Evict Elbit campaign, you can meet me at the table up front. You can email at atlanta@jewishvoiceforpeace.org, or you can find anyone with these name tags tonight. Amy.
Thank you, Ray, and thank you, JVP Atlanta. Tonight I get to rep a brand new baby of an organization called Midbar Belev, which is Atlanta's first anti-Zionist and abolitionist synagogue. For a lot of us, this project is coming out of many years of yearning and dreaming. Midbar Belev, we are translating to mean wilderness and heart. And as abolitionist Jews and as anti-Zionist Jews, wilderness and heart are both concepts that we know personally. We will have our first public-facing opportunities to gather for High Holidays this year. And I have a save the date bookmark that you can get from me or at the back table before you leave. So buy the book, get the bookmark, and we'll see you soon.
All right, thanks y'all so much. So we have been excited about this book for a very long time. We heard it was coming, and we knew Molly's work from her art. And it's really exciting when someone who is known for one thing excels in another area. So Molly Crabapple is an artist and writer based in New York. She's the author of two books, Drawing Blood and Brothers of the Gun, which was longlisted for a National Book Award. She was a 2020 New America Fellow, and her reportage is the winner of the Bernhard Labor Journalism Award and has been published in the New York Times, New York Review of Books, the Paris Review, Vanity Fair, The Guardian, Rolling Stone, The New Yorker, and elsewhere. Her animations have won 2 Emmys and an Edward R. Murrow Award. Her art is in the permanent collections of the Museum of Modern Art. It's pretty amazing. And if you got here early enough, you were lucky to get a collectible piece of art that Molly brought for all of us, which is really wonderful. We're really excited to have Adam Horowitz here as the conversation partner tonight. Adam is the managing editor of mondoweiss.net, an independent website covering news, politics, and debate around Palestine. Adam was the co-editor of the Goldstone Report, The Legacy of the Landmark Investigation of the Gaza Conflict, which came out in 2011, with Lizzie Ratner and Philip Weiss, and has been active in Jewish anti-Zionist movements for the last 2 decades. So there's no better person to have this conversation with Molly tonight. I know the sound is a little weird, so I'm going to keep working on it for all of our folks online and everyone in the room. We are really glad that the space is so full. So if you can't hear, just bear with me, and we will keep working on it. But we are going to have about 45 minutes of conversation, some reading, and then we are going to take questions. So settle in, and please put your hands together for Molly Crabapple.
During his elder years, my great-grandfather, that's Tinny, during his elder years, my great-grandfather, the post-impressionist artist Sam Rothbort, tried to paint back into existence the murdered world of his shtetl childhood. Amidst the hundreds of watercolors that he called memory paintings, one stood out. A girl, silhouetted against some cottages, her dress the same color as the crepuscular sky above. A moment before, she'd hurled a rock through one now shattered cottage window. On the painting's margin, her boyfriend offered more rocks. Itka the Bundist breaking windows, Sam captioned the work. I may have been 15, 17, or 20 when I saw the watercolor. In my great-aunt's sun-baked living room, or my mother's apartment. I don't recall exactly. What sticks with me is the old-world awkwardness of the heroine's name. Itka. I turned the Yiddish syllables on my tongue. And Bundist. What was that? This question became the thread that led me to the Bund, a revolutionary society of which my great-grandfather had been a member, whose story was interwoven with the agonies and triumphs of the Jews of Eastern Europe, and whose name has all but been erased. But this thread did not merely draw me back into a vanished past. It became a guide for our moment, in all its horror and possibility, in all its repression, courage, and loss. Founded in 1897 in the city of Vilna in the Russian Empire, and reaching its height in interwar Poland, the Bund was a sometimes clandestine political party whose tenets were humane, socialist, secular, and defiantly Jewish. Bundists fought the Tsar, battled pogroms, exalted the Yiddish language, and built vast networks of political and cultural institutions out of little more than love and grit. Seeking to liberate Jews from the poverty and violence of interwar Poland, they raised their children on the radical ethos of working-class solidarity and subaltern pride. Ultimately, these youth helped lead the Warsaw Ghetto Revolt. Though the Bund was largely obliterated by Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, the group's opposition to Zionism better explains its absence from current consciousness. Though the Bund celebrated Eastern European Jews as a people, they irreconcilably opposed the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. The diaspora was home, the Bund argued. Jews could never escape their problems by the dispossession of others. Instead, Bundists created the doctrine of Doigkeit, here-ness. Jews had the right to live in freedom and dignity wherever it was they stood. They would fight for a better and more beautiful world, even alongside people they had been raised to see as their enemies.
Thank you so much, Molly. Welcome, everyone. Like ER said, I'm Adam Horowitz. I work with the website mondoweiss.net, and I am so excited to talk to you about this incredible book. Closer to me. I'm scared of it.
Name the echo. What should we name him? I think I'm naming the echo Pestis. Our
Okay,
third conversation partner.
closer. Okay, so I'm really excited to talk about this book. There's so many different elements of it. And thank you so much for starting off with that reading, because of course my first question was going to be, what was the Bund, for those of us that aren't familiar? And you helped share that. So thank you. But something that you didn't talk about in that, which I think is an equally useful introduction to this book, was if you could say a little more about what brought you to the topic.
I grew up obsessed with my great-grandfather. And that might sound a little strange because your great-grandfather, they were a long time away and he died before I was born. But my great-grandfather, Sam Rothbort, was a painter. And he taught my mother how to paint. And my mom taught me how to paint. And so I always viewed the very fact that I could exist as an artist as a gift from him. He was a bohemian, a leftist, a moral vegetarian before his time who went bankrupt during the Depression for trying to run a no-kill egg farm and forcing his wife to spend all of her time separating 1,000 quarrelsome roosters. He was a character, and he was someone I felt deeply connected to from the youngest ages. And as I read in the reading, I came across the Bund because of this painting of a young woman throwing this rock through a window. And this painting, it blew my mind because it was so different than I imagined a young Jewish woman at the end of the 19th century would be, that I thought that word, Bundist, that was the reason that this girl, Itka, was so different. But for a long time, this fact that my great-grandfather was in the Bund was something that wasn't really fleshed out. There was other writing where he said he was in the underground, where he said he took part in strikes and sabotage in the old country. But I had a very vague idea about it, what it was. And I think it would have just stayed as a family curiosity that I would get drunk and Wikipedia sometimes. Not that that's relatable to anyone here, I'm sure. If I hadn't gone to Palestine in 2015. In 2015, I was a guest of Palestine Festival of Literature. And I stayed after the festival was over. And at that time, I was able to go to Gaza, where I reported for Vice. And I don't think anyone who visited Gaza during the years of the blockade could come out of that experience without a profound disgust for the regime that was locking millions of people in this open-air prison. Funny, tough, cynical, cool, generous people locked in an open-air prison and just being droned and bombed every few years because of this regime and its fucked up ideology. And that ideology, of course, being Zionism. And so when I got home from Palestine, I was doing my usual nerd vice of drunken Googling and about the Bund. And I was reading more and more, and I realized two things. I was like, one, this was an anti-Zionist movement. And two, it was there for the most important events of the first half of the 20th century. And why was this Jewish movement that was there, that was interwoven with the most important events of the first half of the 20th century, so erased from current consciousness that I only knew about it because of watercolors that my great-grandfather had done of his memories of his small town that he came from? Why was that? And to me, the answer was that, in part, was because it was anti-Zionist. And that was interesting. And so I started getting obsessed. I started reading all of the English language scholarship I could. And I wrote a piece for the New York Review of Books in 2018 that remains the most popular essay I've ever written in my life. It's something that people would stop me on the street in different continents to tell me that they loved. And after I wrote this essay about the Bund, all of these elderly people who were the children of Bundist survivors got in touch with me. People like the great lesbian poet Irena Klepfich, whose father, Michael, was the bomb maker in the Warsaw Ghetto, or the great union leader, Mark Ehrlich, whose grandfather, Henryk Ehrlich, was leader of the Bund in Poland. And these people came to me with stories that were so precious and that were so vital. And I was just like, I can't put this down. And I often joke that we journalists, we are the fuckboys of the intellect. Because Because while we're obsessed with something, we're just like, oh yeah, you and me, baby, we're going to be together forever. And then the article comes out and you move on. But I was like, with the Bund, I was like, no, baby, me and you, this is not just a fling. We're getting married. And so I spent about 7 years writing this book. I learned Yiddish. I went to Latvia, Lithuania. I went to Poland twice. I went to Ukraine during the Russian invasion. I translated some of the dullest socialist texts that you could imagine. Like, this was a martyrdom, man. Like, I mean, it's bad enough to read this shit in English, but can you imagine? Like, you're just like going through the minutes of Soup Kitchen in Pinsk and the factional disputes on its board, right? And in the course of these 7 years, as we know, some things happened with history. There was a pandemic that killed millions of people. Russia invaded Ukraine. Donald Trump came back into power, and the genocide in Gaza began. And while I did not do the bulk of the research for this book during the genocide, I did the bulk of the writing during it. And I cannot tell you what it did to my brain to be like texting with people I knew and worked with inside Gaza while it is being liquidated block by block, and then trying to forensically reconstruct how the Nazis liquidated the Warsaw Ghetto block by block. I think my brain is probably shattered and my heart as well in ways that are a little bit hard to be eloquent about right now, but I suffice it to say that you understand. And it is a book that owes a lot to Palestinian thinkers, people like Tarek Bakoni, Ibtisam Azim, Sarah Yassin. And it is a book that is deeply imprinted with my experiences in Palestine and my experiences as a lifelong member of the left from a leftist family.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I love that. And there's an element of it in the book of your great-grandfather as this sort of portal through which you enter this whole story that ends up being much larger than you could have ever have imagined when it started, and that context of writing it during the genocide. And there's a few moments in the book where you take this sort of like meta view of, and as I was writing this, I was getting that phone call. And I just found that so powerful here to really put this in this current day context. And so I see some people here have the book. I hope by the end of the evening, everyone will be leaving with the book. But one thing I would say about this, and this kind of speaks a little bit to the process that you were just talking about. So this is, no doubt about it, this is a history book. And this is a history book that reads like a spy thriller. I mean, it is you turn the page and there are, it's a cast of thousands, it feels like. There's so many different characters, including your great-grandfather, who is in here. And I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about what your process was for even working in those archives or working with these diaries, or just because the story is told through such a personal lens, it feels like, of the people who went through it. And I just wonder, as a journalist and as a writer, if you could tell us a little bit, like, how did you do that? Because as I was reading it, I was just like, how did you do this?
So there's a few things I'd say. The first is that this book is an act of lunacy and madness. Like, I did not know what I was getting into when I started writing this book. And it dawned on me that I had actually signed up to write the history of the first half of the 20th century from the point of view of the defeated, I became increasingly afraid, because not only am I not a trained historian, not only did I not graduate college, I never went to academic college. I went to a school called Fashion Institute of Technology, where you were allowed to paint your feelings in lieu of writing papers. So I felt like, what have I done? And so because I had this huge sense of inferiority, I was like, I have to read everything. I started with all of the books on the Bund that I could in the languages I knew before Yiddish, or that I could read in before Yiddish, which was French and Spanish and English. I learned Yiddish to read all of these like original memoirs, archival documents. There's like, the Bund's archives are primarily at YIVO in New York City, a brief subway ride from me. So I just basically lived there. I also wanted to read things that were by people who did not like the Bund, because I think that no matter how much you love a movement, we all know that movements are kind of liars about themselves too, and you can't just be looking at it through their own eyes. So I would read stuff by Bolsheviks who were very critical of Bundists, of people like Nikolai Sukhanov, who wrote like the best chronicle of the February Revolution and its aftermath, who like was pretty snippy about some of the Bundist leaders. Or Leon Trotsky, famed Bund antagonist. I would read the Zionist press as well in Warsaw, which excoriated the Bundists. They were like having street brawls. And I would read stuff by Polish socialists. I would read also a lot of just like the mainstream press of the time. So it'll sound crazy now in our era of complete media collapse, but like the Brooklyn Daily Eagle was sending correspondents to Eastern Europe in 1905 to do on-the-ground reporting of battles in the 1905 revolution. So a lot of the color I got, it was from reading old newspapers. And then another thing was, so I made the decision that if I was going to embark on something as crazy as this, I was going to write about things that I loved. And I was going to not write stuff that felt like gruel and stale broccoli to me. And so what feels like gruel and stale broccoli to me is faithfully reprinting the minutes of meetings, and particularly the resolutions that are made after them. This really is like stale broccoli. And what I was interested in sex and violence and beefs and romance and things that were funny and internationalism and solidarity and betrayal, right? So in thinking about who I made main characters, a lot of that was determined by who had good memoirs that had a lot of interiority to them. There was one guy I really wanted to be a main character, Victor Alter, because he's like hot, and I just like really, he's like by far the sexiest dude in Boone's photo archive. But he did not write about his interiority. He wrote about economics, and so I wasn't like seized by him in that way. Whereas Sofia Dubnova, who's my favorite character, she wrote a gorgeous memoir, which I learned actually is a much truncated memoir. The English is much truncated from the Russian memoir. So if anyone speaks Russian and wants an 800-page translation project, I think I have the thing for them. I also, because I'm a visual artist, I looked a lot at visual reference, right? I looked at photojournalism of the era to see what things were like. I, looked at like Google like Street View of buildings that still existed. I went to the places as much as I could. I couldn't go to Russia or Belarus, but I went to, as I said, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Ukraine. And even in places like Warsaw, where the Nazis just like bulldozed that city, I still wanted to like feel the air. I wanted to see the wildflowers. I wanted to get a sense of the physical electricity of a place, which you just can't do, right, unless you have been there. I looked at songs. I looked at movies. I often would try to like look at like what the cultural life was like at a moment. For instance, I looked up the hit tangos in Warsaw in the 30s and saw that like Suicide Tango was the hottest song. I looked up like what people wore, what they ate, all of the stuff of life. And I also was very influenced by three writers, all of whom are fiction writers. I was very influenced by the great Russian dissident novelist Victor Serge, by Vasily Grossman, the author of Life and Fate, and also by William Vollmann, our great, like, sainted, mad writer now who wrote a book called Europe Central that I think is the greatest work of historical fiction ever written. And all of them had this just incredible detail to the point where, like, Grossman is talking about a bombing in Stalingrad and how the cats feel the vibration of the bomb beforehand and scurry out of their little underground tunnels. And I was like, I want to be able to do that. And in order to do that, I need to know everything, right?
I mean, that's incredible. And I'm so glad that I asked that because, so first of all, for people that have the book, or if you haven't looked at it yet, you're looking through it and then you get to the notes section, which is like this last, it's about 100 pages in literally the smallest font I've ever seen, because I'd be reading it and it would be like, and she walked down the street and looked over her shoulder. And I'm like, but then I look in the notes. I'm like, yeah, that is like literally from her diary. Like, so it just brings incredible color and like, frankly, like entertainment. Like this is it's a entertaining book to read in addition to the issues that we're going to get into and just the raw history that I learned from reading this. So I'm glad that I asked that. And so we could spend our time here talking about history, and we're not going to, but it is an important reason to read this book. But the main thing that I want to talk about is, and it's something that you talked about in that introduction and talk about throughout the book, is what does this all mean for us today? And what are the lessons? What are we to take from it to inform what we're all living through today? And to me, that there's sort of two ways to look at it. And I kind of want to split out the conversation. There's a very sort of universal aspect to this. Anyone who reads this book, no matter who you are, there are lessons to learn from it, and things that we could take to inform, especially our activism today. And then, of course, there's a very like Jewish discussion. And so I kind of want to talk about like sort of take a more like universal approach and then a more particular approach. But I'm curious what you think. And again, you alluded to it at the beginning, history never repeats, but we're also living through a moment right now that has a lot of hallmarks of past moments of history, of past moments of fascist attacks on the left, and I expect it will only be getting worse in this country. But I am curious, as you look back in this history and think about today, what do you think about as the lessons for today, or the things that people should be aware of or cautious about?
Thank you. As you said, this is not a book that is for Jews alone. I feel that sometimes Jewish history gets sort of like segmented off into its own box as if it's totally separate from the history of the left or the history of the world. And I want none of that. This is a history for everyone. Especially this is a history for everyone who's a leftist, everyone who is a fighter for the better and more beautiful world. And these are everyone's ancestors, whether you're Jewish or not. There are so many things that leftists can learn, both from the Bund specifically, but also from this particular moment in time. I could talk about practical things like how to do an eviction defense, but I'm going to focus on a sort of like three larger things. The first is that the Bund was living in a time of polycrisis. They were living in a time of rising fascism, of constant stupid border wars, of economic collapse, the Great Depression, of a government run by empty-headed morons who were using racism as a way to deflect from the fact that they couldn't deal with the economic collapse, something that would never happen today, and of immigrants with paperwork that wasn't quite correct being put in concentration camps. This is all, a part of their world. And a lot of times with leftists, I see us being like, what should we do? Should we do mutual aid? No, we should do like electoral stuff. No, we should do labor organizing. And the answer is you do all of it. You do all of it. And that's what the Bunds did. They did all of it, right? They had an electoral program. And by 1939, they were the most popular Jewish party in Poland electorally. They got the majority of the Jewish votes. They came out of the union movement, and they had a powerful trade union movement. They also built an entire alternate world for their people, something that encompassed summer camps, theaters, newspapers in multiple languages that didn't just report on the socialist movement around the world, but translated avant-garde literature into Yiddish for Warsaw Jewish workers, because nothing was too good for the working class. They had the most popular sports club in the country, and they sent athletes to the Workers' Olympiad. They had a women's movement that fought for free childcare and equal pay. They had Boy and Girl Scouts. They had a teenage movement. And they had a militia that defended their people from attacks by leftist sectarians, the mafia bosses, and especially nationalist thugs that were backed by the Polish government. And so, earlier on, I was thinking about the interwar period. But yes, and earlier on, the militia started when they were in the Russian Empire, and it protected them from attacks by Russians and every other sort of Christian group in the Russian Empire that wanted to break some skulls and steal some things and thought Jews were good people to do that with. Now, when I look about what this looks like in contemporary world, I mean, I think about the DSA in New York City, which not only, just got the mayor, but is a group that has built this very thick social culture, everything from dances to soccer clubs to like speed dating. And I think that sort of very thick culture, it makes it so that people aren't just like atomized volunteers who participate in like door knocking and then go home and don't see each other again. It makes them lovers and comrades and friends. And I think those sort of bonds are what sustain people past like the high point of, let's say, winning an election. So that's one thing, the thick cultural world, right? The second thing is I think that the time that the Bund lived in shows the absolute essential nature of the left taking power. Because the Bund, and I love them, I mean, I wouldn't have written this book before, because if I didn't love them, obviously, sometimes they weren't so good at that, right? Like they were people who often would flounce out of a room if there was some bastard they didn't like who had done some parliamentary skullduggery to marginalize them, and they would flounce. They would leave the room and they would forgo whatever power they had because they didn't want to exist in a compromised space. And what this actually led to was it led to them being completely politically marginalized and their enemies taking power. And what happens when your enemies take power? They shoot you. They shoot you in the fucking head, right? That's what happens if fascists take power. And I think it is very important for people on the left to take power seriously, because our enemies, the people who are against us, they want to throw us out of helicopters. They make T-shirts of it. They just released a list of Cuban-backed enemies of the state that includes Amy Goodman, right? So, exactly. In fact, almost every white person on that list was Jewish. And so I think when you look at this, it shows that you really, really need to take power seriously, because it's not noble to forgo it. What happens when you forgo it is that people you care about and your communities die. So that's the second thing. The third thing is, and this is sort of the like bleeding core of the book, is that solidarity is hard, it's fragile, it breaks all the time. It's not easy, right? I don't think people are biologically destined to hug things out, not at all. But it's the only thing that can save us. There is no other answer than solidarity across difference. All that exists, if you get rid of that, is just taking turns as tormentor and victim forever. And the thing about solidarity that's really important, particularly important, is you have to give it before things get too bad. And so when I look at Minneapolis, right, where so many American citizens of all backgrounds risked their lives to keep their immigrant neighbors from being dragged off to concentration camps, that's the sort of solidarity it takes, right? And so much of why Zionism was able to gain hegemony after the war is because that solidarity was denied, and especially that sort of human solidarity was denied by the people most able to give it, which is America, England, the powerful Western democracies. Those are my three lessons for people writ large. There's also lots of cool tips for organizing in the book that you can get. But those are the three big ones. Now for Jews, right? What do Zionists tell us? Zionists tell us that they own our history. They tell us that in between the Romans' destruction of the temple and the Nakba of 1948, all of Jewish history was ash and pain and death, and that it ends with these weak Jews getting gassed, and that the strong Jews were always Zionists. To be strong means to live means to be a Zionist, and to be a Zionist means bravely oppressing Palestinians and now doing a genocide, right? And they try to colonize our history. They try to say that we are freaks, that we're not Jews. I recently had I've had a number of articles denouncing me. One of them brought up daughter of a Puerto Rican. My father is Puerto Rican, as if this was a bad thing. They try to say that we do not exist. And anyone who knows anything knows that not only have there been leftist Jews, right, but that the history of the European left is largely a Jewish history. And we have so many ancestors. We have such a proud heritage on the left, a proud heritage of fighting for solidarity across difference, for equality, and for liberation. And these ancestors are there, and they're ours. And the Zionists can never erase them.
Yeah, thank you. You know, speaking about the the Jewish politics of this book and what you're talking about, one of the things that struck me as I read it, and we were talking a little bit about before the event, was just like how so much of the debates happening in this moment are still the debates happening today. And this, you know, I love there's this moment in the book where you say, and I forget where is it, somewhere near the end, and like, and that was the end of the Bund. And then you say, or was it? You know, like right when it seemed like the movement had been completely wiped out, completely defeated, you know, the ideas that animate it clearly lived on. And I can imagine, you know, these Zionists who are attacking you in the Wall Street Journal or these other places, just sort of like, I thought we put these ideas to bed decades ago, and yet they continue to bubble up, not only in the Jewish community, but around the world in terms of resisting Zionism. And so that's just something that I found, I mean, it's just so interesting to read, where it's like, you know, we really have no original ideas. Like all the stuff that we're saying now was literally being said 100 years ago about the same, you know, the people who saw the situation that were coming. But I wonder if you can say more about, you know, because it seems like there was a debate happening between the Bundists and the Zionists, basically around where will we find safety? And it was this debate between solidarity or this sort of like ethno-national militarism that the Zionists were selling. And I'm wondering if you could say anything more, because this is, you know, this is the debate that I feel like the Zionists thought that they had won, that now they suddenly are increasingly losing, as we see poll after poll of not only people across the board rejecting Zionism, but including Jews and especially young Jews. And I'm just wondering if you could say anything more about the way that that conversation that you write about here is still taking place. It's still happening. And if there are lessons in here from what the Bund said that we should be mindful of as we continue in this work, whether, you know, with JBP or other organizations.
Thank you. Yes, Zionists literally have made my social media unusable by posting over and over again, LOL, the Bund were all gassed, they're dead, and AI versions of gravestones. Yeah, they really, that their argument is literally, if you're so smart, why are you dead?
Yeah.
Which is telling, right? I think it reflects on how they approach other things. And yes, they thought that this argument was settled, right? Now, in terms of like this, there is a thing where sometimes Zionists, they'll go, the Bund thought that you could have like just safety through solidarity, and, you know, they were so naive. But I want to complicate that a little bit. The Bund knew they lived in a really racist society, right? They were not people who were like, oh, this is great in Poland. It's so fun. Yeah, wow, it's great. No, they knew. They literally had a militia to defend themselves against attacks. They knew they lived in a country where major forces in the government wanted to deport all of Jews to colonize Madagascar or Palestine, and a place where people of all sorts of classes took out their frustration by bashing Jewish skulls. Obviously, they knew that, right? And the thing is that they did not believe that Eastern Europeans, or anyone else for that matter, were genetically racist. They did not think that people are just like born as like little racism killbots and that there's nothing that you can do about it. They believed that there were specific material reasons, usually related to rich people, misleading everyone else, that this racism was so deeply rooted that it was a way of that the elites deflected from their own failures and kept like the workers divided. And so they sought both solidarity of, you know, the elements of the working class in those in the countries where they were that were not, you know, engaged in psychopathy, but they also sought, you know, their own strength, right? I mean, like that's the reason they had a Bundist militia. So it was solidarity across difference, but also brass knuckles and guns that they were trying to guarantee their safety with. Now, their opposition to Zionism, it really began even before the Bund started. In the early years, they thought it was like crackhead impractical. They really thought that they were like, you're going to have millions upon millions of people leave their homes and become collective farmers and land you buy from the Sultan. Sure you will. And they thought it was almost a scam by the Jewish bourgeoisie to deflect the Jewish workers they exploited. The Jewish bourgeoisie could be like, hey, we endowed a yeshiva in Palestine, so we don't have to pay you anything. It's a type of philanthropy washing that I think we see with a lot of rich people today. And there was a very real class dimension where being a Zionist in those early years was much more associated with being upper class. And the Bund was like, no, we need to organize for better wages and for our rights and dignity as workers. However, after the Balfour Declaration, which gives Zionism the backing of British imperial power, the Bund opposes it for another reason, and that's a moral reason, because they're socialists and they believe in human equality. And they know that what Zionism is based on is it's based on depriving Palestinians of their land and their prospects of getting decent work and their political rights. And that Zionism is serving as the handmaiden of the British Empire to do that. The Bund sent leaders to Palestine, one of whom met with Musa Qasim Pasha al-Husseini, who is one of the major Palestinian nationalist leaders. They had a correspondent in Palestine who reported about the brutal land evictions and about how the Jewish-only labor union, the Histadrut, tried to expel Palestinians from work sites. And they took these findings and they translated them into Yiddish so that people in Poland could read these and know what the Zionist enterprise entailed. And as a third thing, they opposed Zionism because they believed that Jews had a right to stay in the places where they were born. They believed that Jews who born in Europe had a right to stay in Europe. And this was not like we're like, it's not like the stupid thing where it's like, oh, you're genetically from Poland, you're Polish. It wasn't that. No one thought Jews were like, originally from Poland. It was more just like you have the right to stay where you're born and where you are. People have a right to live irregardless of their DNA, irregardless of their genes, irregardless of what was called your blood at the time, And they fundamentally believed in diverse and cosmopolitan societies where everyone was allowed to live there without being ethnically cleansed while still speaking their own language and practicing their own culture and fighting alongside each other for what they called the better and more beautiful world. And I think about a quote from 1901 from a local Bundist committee where they said, "We are not strangers here and not guests, even though the Russian government considers us as such. This land is soaked through with our blood, and we will stay and fight for that which belongs to us, for our human, civil, and political rights." And when I hear that, I think about Paul Robeson when he was in front of the docket of the House of Un-American Activities Committee, and he says, "I am not a foreigner. This land's soaked through my people's blood. We built it."
Yeah, that's incredibly powerful. Thank you for that. So I want to share one thing, and then I have one more question, and then I know that you want to finish with a reading before.
Well, no, I'm going to do the reading after the questions.
The last, okay.
And the reason is because I get the last word, not you guys.
Okay, the reading will be at the very end. The one thing I just want to share before getting to my question was, it was, so like as a writer, you're writing this book during the genocide. You reflect that in the book. You've talked about that some. But I know that was true for me too as a reader. And one of the parts of this book that I think wouldn't have necessarily stood out to me in the same way that it did if I were not reading it right now was this moment sort of during but kind of post-Holocaust where some of the Bund leaders and Bund members were sort of reckoning with this understanding that solidarity failed them and that they had been rejected and some took their own lives. And I just know as someone who works closely, has Palestinian colleagues, has a lot of contacts and friends, some of who have left Gaza, some who are still there. I mean, I've had conversations with them reckoning with that same reality. How did the world let this happen? And gosh, like it was just so, I mean, I've had conversations with people. I've tried to imagine what I would feel like in that position, but reading that history of people dealing with some very similar realizations about humanity, yeah, it really just made me sort of refocus on this moment that we're living through now. So I just want to thank you for that and just want to mention that. My sort of last question, and this is like slightly meta because it's not in the book, but sort of about the book. I mean, this book has been an incredible sensation. It's on the New York Times bestsellers list. There are events like this everywhere you go. And one of the things that you write about here in the beginning, and this was about the article, but I think it could just as easily be about this book, is you wrote that hundreds of young Jews sent me messages to say the essay healed a wound within them. And I just think that I'm curious to talk about like what this book is doing for people. And I mean, one of the things, and I meant to say this at the very beginning, but it's just as relevant now. One of the things I love about this book, and one of the things I love about books like it, is there's this element of like hidden history. You know, that this is like, you knew something wasn't right. You knew that Zionism's versions of history wasn't right, but you didn't know what it actually was. And this sort of tells you the truth. Like, I love stuff like that. But I feel like that's part of what the wound is that's being healed. But I wonder if you have any thoughts about why does everyone like this book so much? No, what does,
Because I put cocaine on the pages.
Exactly. No, but what is this? What role is this book playing in terms of what is it offering people that feels so, necessary and that they're so thankful for? Because I'm kind of curious. I think it does get to this issue of these lies that we've been told that are now being uncovered, and something about Jewish identity right now that it doesn't have to be what Zionism tells you it has to be. But I'm wondering, you've been in crowds like this, you've been having all these conversations. I'm wondering what you've gleaned from what people have been telling you about what it means for them and the role that it's been playing.
As usual, I'm going to give a multi-part answer for this. There's a few different types of people who have specifically, I remember them speaking about how touched the book made them and often crying. One group that I feel like I don't see acknowledged enough is there are a lot of Jewish people in their 70s and 60s and 80s, a lot of elderly Jewish women who have been on the front lines of every single freedom struggle that entire time and are still on the front lines of every single thing. And they have been marginalized and they've been told they aren't real Jews and they have been erased by their communities. And I think for them to see this history that they always knew, right? Because these are elders. These aren't, young people who just know things from Hebrew school. These are people who often their parents were communists. Their parents, one guy who wrote to me, like his uncle Avram was a Bundist who shot a cop, it's like they're finally seeing themselves and their own history after decades upon decades of the most cruel erasure. And I remember one man who's very meaningful to me. His name is Marv Zuckerman. He's a Yiddish scholar. He's 94 years old. His father was a Bundist who had been imprisoned in Poland. Marv really helped me with this book. He helped me a lot with the Yiddish. And I invited him when I did my LA event with Hannah Einbinder to sing the Bund's anthem, Die Shvua, in Yiddish. And I just remember him like just crying because he never imagined, he's 94 years old. And this had been something that he had loved for so many decades, and he never imagined that young people would take it up. Another group of people that I think has been very moved about the book is a lot of young Jewish people who went through a more traditional education than I did. I grew up with like Franz Fanon and Emma Goldman in the home. Like I came from a radical household, so it's a little different for me. But a lot of young Jewish people, they went through like the Hebrew school, like the Jewish day school education. And then as they get older and as they, start developing a clarity of vision and their own moral sense, which is something that we all do, right? As we, it's part of becoming an adult, they realize like, wow, the Zionist shit I was sold is fucked up. It is fucked up and it is supremacist and it is wrong. And I want no fucking part of it because I'm a moral person. And I think that was true before the genocide, but after 3 years of a live stream genocide, it's certainly a lot more true. But they have a hole in them because they never were taught anything about any other Jewish history at all. They don't know who their ancestors are. They don't know that they have things that they can feel proud of. And what my book is doing is it's giving them their ancestors back. And that's not my words. That's what I've been told again and again. But then the final group of people I want to talk about is there's a lot of non-Jewish people, right, who love my book. My book has never, it would not have been as popular as it was if it was just speaking to Jewish people. And especially people who aren't Jewish on the left, like they have been so influenced by like great Jewish thinkers, whether it's like Howard Zinn or, whether it's watching Amy Goodman on Democracy Now!. They have Jewish friends, but they're also seeing this genocidal ethno-state, right, that is conflating being Jewish with the most foul crimes against humanity. And they're like, how do I reconcile this? How do I reconcile like all my cool Jewish friends and also all of these like great writers that I loved so much, all these musicians? How do I reconcile it? And what this is doing is it's giving them one part of Jewish history that is not, and in fact is opposed to Zionism. And it's letting them be like, I can like love and support my Jewish friends and their history and their heritage without in any way implicating myself with this genocidal ethno-state.
100%. And I mean, I know that is, when I think about it too, in terms of the reaction it's getting, and it is part of this moment that we're experiencing where there is this flowering. I mean, the synagogue that Amy talked about at the beginning, that it's horrible but true that the last 3 years of the genocide has sort of acted as this crucible that is forcing Jews to pick a side. And I mean, this book is so essential in that it tells the history of our side, but we're also in a moment now where we're creating a future for it as well.
Exactly.
And so this book, and it's one of the reasons why I was just like, what do we need to know to move forward? What do we need to move forward? Because, I mean, I believe that for the rest of my life, the rest of, our probably everyone's life in this room, we're going to be reckoning with the events of these last 3 years and previous 75 years. And the institutions which made that possible are going to end, and new institutions are going to take their place. And people in this room are going to be the people that help build those institutions. And guidebooks like this is going to help inform that. And leaders like in JVP and the project that Amy's working on and many others here are going to be the people that chart a new future that is rooted in this past. So I thank you for this. And I wonder if we can move to questions.
And I'm going to make a comment before we start questions, which is that I would like no one to give comments rather than questions. Leon Trotsky enters this book as a comment, not a question man, and it's not a flattering picture, so I want no Trotskys in this room.
Nods. Nods all around.
All right, we're going to do our best here. Okay, because there are so many people, if anybody from the back wants to ask a question, I'm going to ask you to come down to the ramp so that you can ask a question, and I'm going to bring you this microphone.
Yeah. Okay. Who is this thing on? Okay. Hi, Molly. My name is Phoenix. The reason I'm here is because I saw you on the Situation Room with Francesca Ferrantini, and you just happened to say at the very end that you were going to be in Atlanta. I was like, oh my God, I got to go see her. I am a Black anti-Zionist, so I'm sure that's unique. And the reason why I was not, obviously I saw the genocide and everything of that nature, but one of the things that the state of Israel did, there was a referendum in the UN talking about the transatlantic slave trade and how it was the worst crime in history. And there were 3 countries that said, no, that's not true. The first country was the United States, obviously, under Trump. The second country was Argentina, which had Nazis in it, so you knew that was bad. And guess what the third country was? Beautiful Israel. So that angered me. And then, of course, I watched something called The Young Turks. But my question to you is, when you see all the people, because you were talking about the third people, the people like me, that come to your events or that talk to you or whatever, how does that make you feel? I know when Jewish folks come and the older Jewish people, but how does it make you feel when people who are in solidarity that are not your people but see you as they people? How does that make you feel?
It makes me feel so fucking grateful. Yeah, thank you. That's what it makes me feel.
Nah, it's no problem.
Can you hear me? Okay, yeah. I was just wondering, you said earlier in this event that Sofia Dubnova was your favorite character, so I was wondering if you could provide a little bit more on like the qualities that made her your favorite.
I felt a lot of simpatico with Sofia Dubnova because she was both an artist, a poet actually, and a lifelong leftist. And because of that, this is sometimes a more uncomfortable fit than people would like to admit. Because as an artist, sometimes you're quite anarchic and skeptical and decadent, and you like costume parties and to laugh at people, and you hate meetings. And as a leftist, sometimes all of those things are considered undisciplined badness. But also, she had that leftist thing in her, right? Like that inability to accept the world as it is and all of its injustices and horrors, that need to do something to change it. But also she was a poet who liked smoky cabarets and dressing up in cool costumes. And so her memoir, it's also the story of her smuggling pamphlets taped to her body like a pregnant belly, inciting military mutinies, but also getting chewed out by her fellow comrades for reading Nietzsche, which is way too decadent. And and making fun of other comrades who are just like bloviating, pompous guys doing faux secrecy while they're doing meetings in the woods. But it's also the story of someone who is a woman at a time when women's options were constrained, right? When to be a wife and a mother, even if you were, married to the man you loved, and even if you loved your children, was something that in many ways constrained and shrunk your life as well, right? And a lot of her memoir is dealing with that, dealing with the fact that just the labor of being the wife of a frequently imprisoned man and the mother of 2 young children is keeping her from her poetry, which is really like her love. And also in between the wars, she became the Bund's sex columnist. And she is writing these hilarious columns about how you're not allowed to use the Marxist dictum from each according to his ability from each according to her ability to each according to his needs to justify why your ex-girlfriend has to sleep with you. And after Sophia and her 2 sons, they escaped. Henrik hung himself in a Soviet prison, but Sophia was able to escape thanks to a Japanese diplomat named Chiune Sugihara that gave fake visas to a lot of Jews, including her and her family. And she ended her life in New York City. And her grandson, Mark, who I'm very close to, he told me that in her 80s, she threw herself into the civil rights movement. But by this time, her vision was so bad that she would often pick at the wrong shops. And she would stand there denouncing, why don't the Americans have any political sense? Look at this, I'm the only one. And she died at age 101 in New York City. And her grandson, Henry, told me that before she died, she told him that she had a confession to make. She was no longer a socialist, but an anarchist.
Thank you.
Hi. I noticed you mentioned one of the lessons that kind of drew from the Bund was, to take power seriously. And I was wondering what is taking power seriously or not taking it seriously, especially in regards to, anti-Zionism, anti-fascism, labor movements today?
Well, the first thing is, I think that you have to, in the American context, you have to have an electoral program. Like, you have to support people for electoral office. I know a lot of my anarchist comrades think I'm like full of shit with this one. I'm sorry. We have a state that is way too strong for any non-state things to hold up against it long term. And yeah, you have to cultivate people, run people, and win. And these have to be people who are committed to the beliefs that you have. Like, one of the things that I really respect about DSA, I know I'm shilling my org, but you'll forgive me for this, but I respect about it in New York is they don't just like endorse people just cause, like, to put their name on the thing, right? Like, the people that they endorse are people who are theirs, right? Like, Zohran Mamdani was someone, they did his first assembly campaign. I did art for that campaign, They're people who have gone through like a really rigorous form of vetting, including about anti-Zionism, right? And a series of commitments with that. And they're people whose campaigns the DSA basically runs is a big thing, so that they're accountable to them, not in this like gushy sense where it's like, I'm accountable to my community, but they're accountable to them because they like DSA has a huge amount of infrastructure, right? So I think that an electoral program where you can actually make the people you elect listen to you because of like real infrastructural might is one of those things, right? I think also unionization efforts in industries that are important. Like, okay, it might feel really good to cancel the poetry magazine, right? The poetry magazine is less important to Israel than the ports. And so stuff like, when the dock workers organized, in Italy, in solidarity with the flotillas, incredibly, incredibly important. And I think that the work like with people with salts, with people going into workplaces and organizing them in key industries is also a very important part of taking power seriously. And also, and again, like, this is like me saying my own opinions, but like, don't talk in academic jargon. No one likes it except academics, and not even them, right? speak to people how they speak. Like, some people are going to be bros that like to lift, and that's cool. I love bros who like to lift, and some people are going to like video games, and some people are going to like makeup, and some people are going to be like weirdo theater kids and whatever. But you have to speak to people how they are. You have to realize that like people are really diverse and it's all okay. And if you're just speaking academic gobbledygook and in an incredibly sterile and boring way, that's not going to compel people, and that's not going to do what you need to do, which is winning power for your side.
Thank you.
Yeah. We have an online question. I'm trying to get to it. Can you tell us more about Victor Alter? Greg says, I'm close friends with his granddaughter, Professor Nora Alter. I found your story about him to be fascinating and worth an additional deep dive.
Oh yeah. So okay. First of all, Victor Alter was hot. And it's not just me. So I spoke to my friend Victor Galinsky, who is in his early 90s, and he knew Victor when he was like a little boy, and he said that Victor's nickname was the Cary Grant of labor. Because he was, the ladies all loved him. So he came from a wealthy family in Mwana, Poland. He started his revolutionary career before the 1905 revolution, and when some guns that he was storing in his parents' attic exploded, his parents were like, maybe you should leave town right now. He went to Western Europe. He went to first Belgium, where he studied engineering, married a Belgian woman. And then when World War I broke out, he fled to England, which is where he learned English, and he worked as a factory worker and did organizational work in England. After the Russian Revolution broke out, he went back to the Russian Empire and was on a number of Soviets and organizing until he fell afoul of the Bolshevik authorities and had the first of his many imprisonments at the hands of the Bolsheviks. In Poland, between the wars, he was one of the Bund's two undisputed leaders. He was the head of their body of trade unions. He was a city councilman. He was something of a celebrity because he just really liked to be out in the streets. So like if someone was getting evicted and they called the Bund militia to convince the landlord not to evict them, Victor Alter would show up himself and haul their chair back up the stairs. He was someone who would tangle with nationalist thugs in the parks himself. He was funny by all accounts, witty, total womanizer, so I heard. And Nora may or may not agree. This is the rumor I heard. Charming, debonair, and tough. And when the Nazis invaded Poland, the Polish government, they were called the colonels, who were a bunch of like brainless military men who had been promising like blood and soil and army nationalism, they fled the first fucking day. And they fled along with the country's gold reserves to Romania. And Warsaw did not surrender. And the reason Warsaw didn't surrender was because of the Polish Socialist Party, but also because of the Bundists who fought alongside them in the barricades. And they held off the Nazis for weeks. Victor Alter had wanted to stay in Warsaw. The party decided he was too famous and that he should flee east. But he had really lobbied to stay in Warsaw. When he fled east, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east, and he came to the like local party office in where was it? In Koval, and with him and some Polish socialists, and with a declaration that's like, "Comrades, I hope you'll help us free our country from the Nazis," and they arrested him. He went on a series of hunger strikes. They force-fed him, but he won the right to write a textbook of non-Euclidean geometry while he was in prison. He was allowed out along with Henrik Ehrlich, his fellow leader of the Bund, also arrested by the Soviets, in a bid by the Soviets to use their popularity with American Jews to try to get America involved in World War II. But when it became clear that America was going to become involved in World War II, they were both rearrested, and Alter was executed by the Soviets.
Wow. We have a another online question, a person who's earnestly saying, I'm new to this, I'm trying to understand, and because Jews as a whole are such a small population, what do you say to people who are worried that like talking about things like this further divides us as Jews? Like, is that how do you kind of help people think that through?
I mean, there's never been a point in history when we have been united, like ever. I mean, we Jews literally, when the Hasidic movement began, there were literally other Orthodox Jews made another movement called the Misnagadim that existed solely to say the Hasidic movement was shit. So like the idea, though they were also fundamentalists, they just didn't like all the dancing. They wanted more studying. So just this idea that like there was like ever a united Jewish opinion, I just like find fundamentally false. And also I just don't believe that with any group, however small, like there was ever a united opinion amongst that group. I feel like that's unbecoming of human dignity and free will, right? Now, the other thing is like, I don't want to be united with people who support a genocide. Like, just, I don't want to be. I don't care if they're my ethnic group or not. I want to be united with people who fight for a better world. And I think that as a final thing, it is only good to be honest about history, even if it's tricky, even if it's difficult, even if it's fraught, even if it's embarrassing, or even if it's glorious. There's some glory in there too. We owe it to ourselves and each other as thinking beings to speak honestly.
Hi, I'm a lifelong creative musician, artist type, and I've recently become an elected official.
Wow, congratulations.
Thanks. It's something. And I'm just curious if you have any suggestions, like hearing you talk about New York and the party up there and like all the infrastructure, if you have any suggestions for us here where there's not that level of like structure. Like I think the energy is there, and I think there are definitely groups doing it, but just like recommendations for like organizing and getting connected and building more of that electorally.
I mean, so in terms of DSA, I will say I've always been a follower and not a leader in it. Like I'm the person who's like, oh, you show up to door knocking. This is, when, or like, oh, you need me to make coquito for people, like to raise money. So in some ways, like, I'm just going to give it from like maybe the more followers' point of view, if that's okay.
That's helpful.
So, I mean, I remember when we did our first campaign for an elected official, which was about like, it was Haider al-Yatim, who is a Palestinian pastor in Bay Ridge. We did not win. I mean, honestly, a lot of it was just like meeting up, at like a coffee shop or something, downloading that app. What is it called? The Van app, the one that has like all the elected officials things, like getting hyped on like why Pastor al-Yatim was like such a cool dude, and like just knocking on people's doors. I mean, that's like a lot. Like I feel like every get out the vote campaign is. I think we also had like a lot of like parties and events and stuff, so we could be hyped on it. Like we'd always go out and get drunk afterwards, and also, I mean, I think, with New York especially, so a lot of people in DSA in New York, they're not from New York originally, which is criticized a lot, but I think it's a stupid critique because, New York has always been a city of people not from there. But one of the things that I've heard a lot that people enjoy is it's like they're discovering the city by the act of door knocking, because they're going to places, that they might not go to, and meeting people that they might not have a chance to meet in their lives, and trying to like talk to them like as real people. And I think that when you're building your electoral machine, a lot of people are like really scared of doing the door knocking because, society teaches us to like be scared of strangers and be atomized and be, a lot of people on the left are awkward. And I think really talking about actually why it's amazing to connect with your neighbors like that and being real about it. And, also having a buddy so you're not like alone and feeling awkward alone, I think really, really help. And also just like keeping people mobilized, there'll be like a WhatsApp group, right? And then the WhatsApp group will funnel people into other campaigns. Because in addition to like getting the people elected, we also have pressure campaigns on like passing the Public Health Act, right? Building renewables, banning ICE from courts, stuff like that. And in addition to having our people come to power, we also put pressure on people who are not our people, but they're not our enemies either, you know? Is that helpful?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
I know we could talk all night and we could ask many, many questions. I'm going to let Barbara close us out because.
But wait, I have my reading. My reading.
No, our
Okay,
last question. Yes. Barbara, will you come this way so that it doesn't squeak at you? I'm giving Barbara this privilege because she is one of those women that you talked about who's been in the streets, and she deserves the credit.
Yeah, I've been in DSA for a very long time, it seems to me, and I totally sympathize with what you said about meetings and stuff. But our chapter is pretty healthy, kind of like New York, I guess. But I've been concerned with the use of the term anti-Zionist as a litmus test, as a purity test for some people who maybe need to be brought along. You know, do you find that? Does anyone find that phenomenon? I mean, some people, some of the young zealots in our organization, you know, love to just attack people, you know, and want to expel them, you know. But DSA has been called a group that's unlike most left-wing groups, which are hard to get into, but easy to get kicked out of. We're very easy to get into, but it's really hard to get rid of some of the badasses. So this whole controversy has been just brewing. But I feel uncomfortable. I mean, I was never brought up as a Zionist. My family's left-wing, and, you know, we didn't really care for Israel at all. But I just wonder, do you find that it's necessary to sometimes blunt the spear, you know, that's thrown at people because they haven't really reached where you and I are, maybe, or where, you know, even where Jewish Voice for Peace is?
I mean, I think that. Oh, yeah, he really had a comment. No, I think it depends on the context we're talking about. I think it's good to be rigorous with elected officials we endorse. Like, I think that comrades? Yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, first of all, we all know that there's just been this problem in the left that's existed forever where you have people who don't like each other for whatever reason, and then they just use whatever is the bad word. Like, they'll be like, I don't hate you because you slept with my girlfriend. I hate you because you're an imperialist. And this is a 100-year-old problem, right? So, I mean, yes, there are obviously people who use bad faith accusations of Zionists the same way that they would use wrecker or imperialist or you know, any other, you know, thing that's bad, right? Because there's someone they don't like. I mean, I think that there are conversations that people can have with, like, their parents, their friends, their loved ones, you know, people at their synagogue, people who they're in community with, right? Where you're not like yelling at them and attacking them, but you're trying to bring them along. But I do think that it is important in DSA right now to make sure that there aren't people who support like Israel. You know what I mean? Because Israel's doing a genocide, and you like don't really want someone who's at cross purposes with that. I think that there are examples where, like, I think about Brad Lander, for instance, right? So Brad Lander, who, you know, for God knows why identifies as a liberal Zionist. I truly don't understand why. I don't actually think he is. I think he just doesn't want to be yelled at. But for God knows why. But he's also an amazing person in New York. Like he got arrested, right, defending immigrants. He personally rescued my mother's friend from an abusive old age home, right? Like he's someone who's been an amazing elected official and champion of New York. He's not going to be someone who gets endorsed by the DSA, and that's fine, right? He left the DSA after October 7th, but he's someone who campaigned alongside DSA people, and he was endorsed by Zoran, and, you know, DSA was definitely like in coalition with him, right? Even though he is not a DSA candidate. And I think that there are certainly fruitful collaborations like that, but ultimately people who identify as Zionist, who are in positions of power, by and large are supporting a state that's doing a genocide, you know? And I think that that's an important thing to not support. And I don't mind the DSA. In fact, I support the DSA being explicitly anti-Zionist, because I think that it's really important to show our Palestinian comrades that we're not an organization that tolerates people that want to kill them, you know?
Now it is the time for your very last word.
So I was advised by my good friend Naomi Klein that I should never leave the last word to other people. And so I'm going to give a reading. Okay, they were right, one friend told me after he finished my manuscript. Right and dead. What's the big lesson you want us to take away from that? After all, the Bund failed. Lost, I answered, more sharply than I meant. What's the difference between failed and lost? He responded. Failure is what happens to those overcome by their own faults and errors. To lose is to succumb to greater force. Here I confess a secret. I didn't just write this book out of scholarly devotion. I had a hidden hope. By studying the Bund story, I wanted to find out if there was some way that my people, the Jews of Eastern Europe, could have saved themselves. The more I wrote, the more I realized the wrongness of my premise. Though individuals escaped in various ways, there was no way out for Eastern European Jews as a collective, not as long as they were fighting alone. No small minority could have rescued themselves from the horrors of the 20th century. Despite astounding feats of heroism, cunning, and creativity, they couldn't hold Hitler back, nor the intractable hatred of so many of their Christian neighbors. The Bund could not change the balance of force. Neither could any other Jewish group in Eastern Europe, whether assimilationist or Zionist, capitalist or communist, Hasidic or Christian convert. 6 million scattered humans can't defeat vast armies of organized killers. The accusation of failure isn't one we should level against the Bund or any other Jewish group of that place and time. It's for the Western world of which they were such a precarious part. It was the West, after all, that hypocritically paid lip service to freedom and humanity, while hewing to the crude doctrines of might. The true failures were the democracies who played nice with Hitler in the early years, then shut their doors to Jewish refugees who fled from the hell they helped enable. The failures were the American and British diplomats who hobnobbed in Bermuda while the Warsaw Ghetto burned. The Western world failed the Jews of Europe when they refused to provide the basic solidarity that the historical moment demanded, the solidarity upon which the Bund's humanism relied. This betrayal allowed Zionism to present itself as the only possible salvation. If the world came down to strong predators and weak victims, Zionism, at least, offered Jews the possibility of strength. But Zionism is ethno-nationalism. Like all ethno-nationalism, it required mass murder to clear the land to build its dream. On this haunted territory, oppressed became oppressors. 70-odd years after they stuck their state upon another people's ruin, the inheritors of Zion would liquidate their very own ghetto in Gaza beside the sea. For ethno-nationalism, this is what winning means. So why did I write this book about the Bund, who lost, who were failed, and not about victorious killers? Because I am sick of monsters, whether they belong to my group or any other. Because I know we all have the capacity to be victims and tormentors, as well as bystanders, staring blankly at a burning wall. Because I want off the samsara wheel of atrocity, and the Bund's demand of solidarity across difference is the only way to get there. Such solidarity is fragile and frequently betrayed, but it is all we have. It is the only thing that can save us. There is no other earth after all. We are trapped together on this one. It belongs to all of us as inheritance and prison. It is Egypt and the Promised Land.
Thank you so much, Molly. Thank you, Adam, for being a wonderful interviewer. Thank you to everyone online. If you're online, you can click the teal button to buy a copy of Where We Live is Our Country from Charis. It really does help us when you buy event books from us. there are a lot of bodies here, which is a wonderful problem to have. But it means that we need to be very orderly in how we have our book signing. So Molly is going to stay exactly where she is, and you're going to come to her. If you already have a copy of the book, don't move yet. Don't move yet. You may begin to line up. If you are in the back, I would love for you to just fold up the chair that you are in and lean it against the nearest bookshelf so that people who are trying to make their way forward can get forward. Please be gentle with each other and careful of each other's bodies so that you're not tripping over each other. If you need to buy a copy of the book, they are for sale up front. And I will just remind you that if you are looking for a place to build solidarity and community, Charis is here. Charis does 300 events a year. We are your secular synagogue, your secular church. We are your place. If you don't believe in God, come on down. We got you. And we would love for you to plug in, get on our email list, and we do need your support. So make a donation up front if you enjoyed tonight's event. You can do that at the register with a credit card, or you can just drop a dollar or two in the little glass jar. That is how we stay independent and free and able to do events like this, because sometimes other places aren't able to host events like this, but we are. So thanks to all of you for being here. Thank you to JVP for being such an amazing partner. Thank you to Amy for starting an anti-Zionist synagogue. We're very excited. And thank you to you all for being here tonight.
And I also want to say one more thing. There was nothing the Bund loved more than being right and telling other people they were wrong. So if you wish to honor the Bund's legacy, I encourage you to buy an extra copy for someone in your life who is wrong.